Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are stripping away the daily noise. You know, the stock tickers, the quarterly earnings, the political gaffes to look at something much, much bigger.
Right.
We are looking at the architecture of the world economy itself. And to do that, we are breaking down a meeting of the minds that, honestly, you just don't see on a single stage.
It really was a heavy hitter lineup. I mean, we aren't talking about pundits speculating on cable news.
Not at all.
We're talking about the people who effectively control the plumbing of the global financial system. The source material for today is a transcript of a panel that just happened. And the premise was fascinating. They weren't asking, what stock should I buy? They were asking, have we seen this movie before?
Right. And spoiler alert, the movie they're referencing is a bit of a horror film for economists. But before we get to the plot, let's introduce the cast. We have Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock.
And just to contextualize that for you listening, BlackRock oversees about $14 trillion.
14 trillion.
That is roughly the GDP of the entire Eurozone.
Right.
So when Larry Fink moves, the market moves.
Exactly. Then you have Ken Griffin, founder of Citadel. He manages $65 billion, and he's arguably one of the most successful market makers in history.
For sure.
Then Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. She's the one deciding the cost of money for all of Europe. And finally, to keep them all honest, Adam Tooze, the renowned economic historian from Colombia.
And the movie they're comparing our current situation to is the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties.
Which, for most of us, is just shorthand for parties, flappers, the Great Gatsby.
And then a massive stock market crash.
Right.
Usually, yes. But Adam Tooze, he opened the discussion by framing it differently. He quoted Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
I love that quote.
And the panel's mission was to identify the rhymes between the 1920s and the 2020s. And let me tell you, the picture they painted wasn't just about stock prices. It was about a fundamental fragility in how the world is organized.
So let's get into the first big rhyme, the setup. How is the geopolitical stage today similar to 100 years ago? Because, I mean, on the surface, it looks pretty different.
Well, Tooze points out that the 1920s was a time of unipolarity. The liberal powers, the U.S., Britain, France, had just won World War I. They were, ostensibly in charge.
Right.
But, and this is the crucial part, they had failed politically. The Treaty of Versailles was a total mess. They couldn't agree on borders. They couldn't agree on how to run the world.
So the politicians were paralyzed.
Exactly. So because the politics were broken, they tried a different strategy. They tried to use finance and technology to glue the world together instead.
Okay, so they thought, if we can't agree on treaties, let's just make everyone rich with new tech and easy money, and maybe they won't notice the political cracks.
That sounds incredibly familiar, doesn't it?
It really does.
It should. Touxi's argument is that we are doing the exact same thing today. We have a fractured geopolitical landscape wars in Europe, the Middle East, rising tension with China, but we are relying on the U.S. financial system and a new tech boom, specifically AI, to hold the world order together.
It's like building a skyscraper on a foundation you know is cracked, but hoping that if you use enough expensive steel beams on the upper floors, it'll hold up anyway.
That is the perfect analogy. And that brings us to the steel beams, the technology.
Yeah.
Christine Lagarde drew a direct parallel here. She noted that the 1920s saw what she called galloping digitalization.
Which sounds funny because they didn't have digital computers.
No, of course not. But they had the tech disruption of their day. Widespread electrification, the telephone, the combustion engine. It was a massive productivity shock.
It changed everything.
It did. It changed how everything was made. And just like today, the stock market went through the roof because of it. Everyone wanted a piece of that new economy.
But Lagarde highlighted a critical difference, something she called the ice factor. I loved this concept because it explains why the AI boom might be, well, harder to pull off than the electricity boom. What is the ice factor?
Think about the tech of the 1920s. If you wanted to build a Ford Model T factory or an electrical grid, you could do that entirely within your own country. You could have a French grid, a German grid, and an American grid. The technology diffused nationally. It didn't strictly require the rest of the world to function.
Okay, I follow. A car engine works the same way in Paris as it does in Detroit. You don't need a live connection to Detroit to drive it.
Exactly. But AI is different. Lagarde, and Larry Fink jumped in on this too, argued that AI requires global scale to work effectively. It needs massive data sets that cross borders. It needs energy that might be generated in one place and used in another for training.
So if you have fragmentation, if Europe puts up a digital wall and the US puts up another and China a third, you actually break the potential of the technology.
You do. So in the 20s, protectionism didn't stop a car from running. But today, data protectionism could stop an AI model from learning.
Or at least stop it from being as smart as it could be.
Right. And this is where Larry Fink got very blunt. He basically said, if we don't coordinate, China wins.
Why China specifically? Is it just because they have a lot of engineers?
It's the scale advantage. Fink argues that China has a massive population, 1.4 billion people, and a very different approach to privacy laws.
Uh-huh.
They can aggregate the data of that entire population into a single training set without much legal friction. If the Western economies fragment, if the US and Europe can't agree on data sharing, they lose that scale advantage. And in the world of AI, the model trained on the most data usually wins.
This leads us to a concept Fink introduced called the scale operators. I found this really interesting because it explains why the economy feels so lopsided right now.
For sure.
It feels like the big companies are just invincible.
Well, it's the K-shaped economy on steroids. Fink argues we are seeing a split. The scale operators, companies that are huge and have the cash to invest billions in AI, are pulling away from everyone else.
And he used Walmart as the prime example.
He did. He talked about their inventory management, which sounds boring.
Right, sounds so boring, but the implications are huge.
They are. It's not just counting boxes.
Yo.
Walmart uses AI to know exactly what is selling where and when instantly. They can optimize their supply chain in real time. If people in Idaho stop buying toasters and start buying blenders, Walmart knows before the store manager does.
And a local retailer or even a regional chain, they just can't afford the billion-dollar data center to do that.
They can't. So the efficiency gap widens. The big get bigger because they have the data, and they get more data because they are big.
It's a feedback loop.
Exactly. And Fink's warning was pretty stark. He said if AI just stays in the hands of the 6 hyperscalers, the big tech giants we all know, we fail.
This technology has to democratize.
It has to trickle down to the dry cleaner, the local manufacturer, the architect. If it doesn't, we just end up with a few trillion-dollar monopolies and everyone else fighting for scraps.
But getting it to the dry cleaner requires massive infrastructure, and that costs money. Which brings us to the financial side of this boom. Ken Griffin had a very surprising take on the bubble question.
I did.
Because everyone is asking, are we just lighting money on fire with all this AI spending?
And Griffin didn't say no. He didn't deny the bubble characteristics, but he did something more nuanced. He framed the hype as a feature, not a bug.
Unnecessary sales mechanism. That is such a cynical yet brilliant way to put it.
Isn't it? Think about the scale of investment needed. We are talking about rewiring the power grid, building data centers the size of small cities.
Manufacturing millions of GPUs.
Right. You need hundreds of billions of dollars. You cannot raise that kind of capital by saying to investors, hey, this might be a modest improvement to our workflow.
Right. Invest in this, it might make us 5% more efficient, doesn't get you $100 billion.
No, exactly. You have to promise the moon. You have to promise a revolution to get the capital to build the rocket.
So the hype generates the cash, which builds the infrastructure. Even if the hype is exaggerated, the infrastructure remains.
Precisely. Griffin compared it to the fiber optic boom in the 90s. Many of those companies went bust during the dot-com crash, but the cables stayed in the ground.
And that infrastructure powered the internet age for the next 20 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is a specific risk with AI hardware that Fink pointed out, the bad CAPEX problem. This is where the physical reality of chips, well, it bites you.
This is the obsolescence issue, right?
Yes. Think of it this way. If you buy a house, that's capital expenditure or CAPEX, you expect that house to last 50 years. It's a good investment. But if you buy a laptop for $5,000 and next year a new laptop comes out that is 10 times faster for the same price, your $5,000 laptop is effectively worthless.
And we are doing that at the scale of billions.
We are spending hundreds of billions on chips right now. If a new chip comes out in 12 months that makes today's chips look like pocket calculators, that capital is wasted. It's bad CAPEX. We are literally betting hundreds of billions on the lifespan of silicon.
Okay, so that's the tech rhyme. Massive potential, massive cost, fueled by hype. Now let's look at the bust side of the equation. Or specifically, the debt. Ken Griffin called this the gloom and doom section of the panel.
And he made a critical distinction between the 1920s and today. If you look at the crash in 1929, the recklessness was in the private sector.
Right. Individuals were buying stocks on margin borrowing money to gamble.
Exactly. Companies were over-leveraging. The government, believe it or not, was actually running a budget
The
surplus.
budget surplus, that sounds like a fairy tale from a land far, far away.
It does. But today, Griffin argues the situation is flipped. The private sector banks, households, is actually relatively healthy. We learned our lesson in 2008.
So the recklessness today is entirely in the government.
All in the government. We have $38 trillion in national debt.
And this is where the conversation shifted to what I would call the great gamble. Governments are spending this money, running these deficits, effectively betting the house on something.
They are betting on the AI miracle. That is the subtext of this whole discussion.
Yeah.
The U.S. government is accumulating debt at a pace that is mathematically unsustainable unless
GDP growth explodes.
Exactly. They need the denominator to get bigger. They are betting that AI will increase productivity so much, making us all so much richer and more efficient, that the tax revenue will naturally rise to cover the $38 trillion.
It's a race between the debt accumulating and the AI paying off.
It is.
That is a terrifying bet, because if AI turns out to be just pretty good, if it's just a better chatbot and not a renewed industrial revolution, we are in deep, deep trouble.
That is the risk. If productivity stays at 1% or 2%, the math simply doesn't work. Larry Fink asked the question, is there a red line? Is there a moment where the bond market looks at the U.S. government and says, no more?
And what did Lagarde say to that? I mean, she controls the printing press for Europe. She must have a view on when the music stops.
She had a very central banker answer, which is to say, it depends on what you buy. She argued that not all debt is created equal. If you borrow money to build a bridge or a data center or to secure energy independence, the market will fund you. That's productive debt. It creates future value.
But if you borrow money just to hand out checks to keep voters happy?
That is unproductive debt.
Yeah.
And that is when the bond vigilantes come for you.
Yeah.
Lagarde also linked this to social stability. She warned that if debt forces austerity,
If the government has to slash safety nets because they can't borrow anymore.
you get societal dislocation.
And going back to the rhyme, the 1920s dislocation led to some very dark places.
It did. Political extremism, the rise of fascism, populism. When the economics break, the politics break. Lagarde is warning that fiscal responsibility isn't just about accounting, it's about preventing political radicalization.
Speaking of politics breaking economics, we have to talk about trade. Because this was another huge rhyme with the 1920s. They called it the ghost of 1930.
The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act.
Even the name sounds dusty and depressing, but it was a huge deal.
It is infamous for a reason. In 1930, after the crash, the U.S. government tried to protect American industry by raising massive tariffs. President Hoover signed it to fulfill a campaign pledge.
Despite a petition signed by over 1,000 economists begging him not to.
Begging him. And the result?
Catastrophe.
Total catastrophe. Global trade collapsed by 60%. It turned a bad recession into the Great Depression.
And today, we are seeing tariffs coming back into fashion. We hear about them constantly.
We are. And Lagarde came armed with data. She cited a study from the Kiel Institute showing that when the U.S. puts tariffs on goods, the cost isn't paid by the foreign exporter. China or Europe doesn't pay it.
So who does?
The U.S. consumer and importer pays up to 96% of the cost.
So when politicians say we are putting a tariff on them, we should hear we are putting a sales tax on you.
That is how Griffin interprets it. He called it a regressive tax on American consumers. But he added another layer that I think is the most insightful point of the whole trade discussion, the cronyism risk.
This is the idea that protection makes companies lazy.
Lazy might be too soft. It makes them political. If you protect an industry with tariffs, say, steel or solar panels, the executives at those companies realize that their profit margin depends more on their relationship with Washington than on the quality of their product.
Right. Why spend $1 billion on R&D to make a better solar panel if you can spend $10 million on lobbyists to keep cheap competitors out?
Exactly. Griffin argues this hurts the vitality of the economy. He pointed out that American dynamism comes from competition. NVIDIA used to just make video game chips. Anthropic didn't exist 3 years ago.
Right.
That constant churning and death and rebirth, that's what drives growth. Tariffs freeze the status quo. They protect the dinosaurs.
And in a world where we need massive innovation to pay off our debts, protecting dinosaurs seems like a spectacularly bad strategy.
It is the opposite of what the scale operators need.
So let's recap the board. We have the tech boom rhyme, the debt rhyme, and the trade war rhyme. The last pillar they discussed was the plumbing itself, the markets. And Adam Tooze dropped a history bomb here that I did not know.
Hmm.
Central banks, as we know them, were basically invented in the 1920s.
Yes, they were created to be knave-proof.
Knave-proof. I love that term.
It's a great phrase. In the 1920s, as democracies became more populist, there was a fear that knaves, dishonest politicians, would mess with the money supply to win votes. Print money to hand out before an election.
Right.
So they created independent central banks to lock the money supply away from short-term politics.
Which feels very relevant today as we see more politicians openly criticizing central banks and demanding lower rates.
The independence is under threat, absolutely. But there is also a technological shift in how markets work that gives the panel some hope.
Yeah.
Think about 1929. Why are those photos of the crash always people standing outside the New York Stock Exchange in coats and hats?
Because they had no idea what was going on inside.
They were literally in the dark. The ticker tape was hours behind. They didn't know they were broke until the end of the day.
Right.
Today, Griffin and Fink argue that transparency makes the market safer. We know the price of everything down to the millisecond.
But Fink wants to go even further. He started talking about tokenization. And I want to be clear for you, he wasn't talking about buying Dogecoin or meme stocks.
No, not crypto speculation. He's talking about the underlying technology, blockchain. His vision is to move markets onto a ledger where settlement is instant.
Okay.
Right now, if you sell a stock, it takes a day or two for the money to actually settle. That creates risk.
Counterparty risk.
Yeah.
What if the guy you sold to goes broke in those 2 days?
Exactly. Fink argues that if you tokenize markets, settlement is instantaneous. He pointed to Brazil and India as actually being ahead of the U.S. in this digitization. His argument is that tokenization reduces fees, reduces corruption, and creates ultimate transparency.
It sounds like he wants to digitize trust.
In a way, yes. And in a world where trust in human institutions like governments and banks is falling, just like in the 1920s, maybe code is the only place left to put it.
So let's zoom out. We have covered the scary parallels. The crushing debt, the temptation of protectionism, the geopolitical fragmentation. But we also have the differences, instant information, the productive potential of AI. How did this group of masters of the universe wrap it up? Was it doom or boom?
Ken Griffin, for all his warnings about debt, ended on a note of extreme optimism. He said, despite the risks, he would rather be alive today than be the King of England 200 years ago.
I mean, hard to argue with that. The King of England didn't have antibiotics or air conditioning or ChatGPT.
Exactly. His point is that the baseline of human prosperity is just so much higher. The floor has been raised. But Lagarde's closing was more of a plea. She coined a phrase, minimum cooperation.
Minimum cooperation. That feels very pragmatic, very European.
It is. She is saying, we don't need to be best friends with China or Russia. We don't need a global kumbaya moment. But we need just enough cooperation to keep the ice factor from freezing the AI revolution.
We need enough alignment to let the data flow and the trade happen.
Right. It brings us back to that central race. On one side, you have the scale operators, the incredible productivity potential of AI to fix our problems. On the other side, you have the drag of $38 trillion in debt and the friction of tariffs.
That is the race. And the governments have placed their bets. They are all in on productivity winning.
They are.
So here's the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We talked about the government betting that AI will pay off the debt. But what if the timeline is wrong?
The mismatch.
Exactly. What if AI is miraculous? What if it truly changes the world? But what if it takes 10 years to really pay off, to really change GDP, and the debt crisis hits in 5?
That is the 1920s lesson. The tech was real. Cars and electricity did eventually create a golden age of prosperity in the 50s and 60s. But the financial crash happened first.
The timing is everything.
You could be right about the technology and still go broke waiting for the payoff.
History rhymes, but the tempo might be the thing that kills you.
Let's hope we can keep the rhythm without the crash.
Absolutely. That is all for this deep dive into the minds of the money masters. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.